today I want to talk to you about the Domino 1202 backup and restore. I will go through a couple of details first on storage optimization, which I don't want to go into that much detail, but give you some ideas. Explain why we want Domino, why we have Domino 12 backup and why it's natively integrated, the main features. I will go through this a bit. And then I will explain in general what snapshot backup is, and finally what has been introduced in 1202 on the Windows platform, the VSS writer support. And beside that, I plan to have demos. I will show it live because that's really where you understand how it really works. I have two different demos, and we can have questions and answers after each section or at the end, and you can put all your questions into the chat. So the more we have interaction, the more it is valuable for you. So a presenter can't do everything in preparation. So every audience is a bit different. So I had a very similar presentation at CollabSphere, and I added a very cool demo at the end, which I built yesterday, actually, a new integration, and I think you will love it. So I really like it, and you will see in a minute. Okay, so before we look into backup, I did a recap on storage optimization. So when you look into storage and into backup, both work usually hand in hand. So we care about storage on the one side for the Domino server and want to reduce the storage, and on the other side we want to reduce the size of the backup. So when you look into costs for backup, standard storage is cheap, but if you look into storage that we need for Domino, we have IO intensive storage for most of the storage, like NSF is the main part. It needs to be high available, and you need to back it up probably every night, right? So, and also the time window for your backups is at most 12 hours, even less in some cases. So we really want the storage to optimize first before we look into backup optimization. And most of the features that I have listed on those slides, I will not go through every detail. It's more for you to get an idea and a reference to look it up afterwards. So most of those features are already available since 8.5. And we have seen out in the field when I work as a consultant that many customers still don't have all the storage optimization features in place. They come for free in the platform, and it is really essential that you look into storage first before you optimize your backup strategy. On top of that, also database maintenance operations are important. So I wouldn't run compact every night, but it makes sense to run it at least once per week, right? So all of the following that I'm telling you is to look into before you optimize your backup. So when you look at a database, and this is a graphics that I built a long time ago, but this relationship between the different parts of the storage didn't change much. So when you look into a database that is not optimized, you see that most of the storage is in attachments. So it's 70 to 75% usually. Then you have the documents, that's a big part. This is everything that is not attachment and everything that's not design or index. Then you have the design, which is usually just a very small part of the database. And then you have the index, the view index and folder index, which is called NIF, Notes Index Facility. And it's like 10 to 15%. So when you look into all of those parts, we have different ways to reduce the size. So for example, design node compression, which has been introduced in 8.0 already, gives you 50% of the storage. For example, the mail template, the 1201 mail template is 37 megabytes, and then compressed it's 17 megabytes. This is not really much difference, but it's also about the I/O reduction. Second came up in 8.01. It's the compression of the documents. It's very similar to the design compression, but just for documents. And it also gives you 50%, 40 to 50% back on the NSF. Why is that important? Because in total, finally, we are going to back up the NSF file. And the NSF file, if you remove the attachments and put them to DAOs, reducing the NSF storage by 50% is a lot. It reduces the data you have to back up, right? So here is a very old Lotusphere presentation slide that shows that it's reducing the I/O, and that is the essential part as well. So it's not just about the backup cost, it's also about the reduction of the I/O operations. Next would be attachment compression. This is usually on by default in current mail templates, so you usually don't need to change that. But for existing applications, you might want to have a look if LZ1 is the attachment compression algorithm. So that's something also to look into. And last but not least in the storage optimization is DAOs. So DAOs is something that has been introduced in 8.5. It replaced shared mail that was there earlier and didn't really work. But DAOs is a very, very interesting option because it will do two things. One is it deduplicates attachments. And secondly, the attachments will not be in your NSF anymore. And from backup point of view, you can back up NSF and DAO separately. So all the optimization that you see, or all the backups that you see, are taking care about NSF for online backup. DAOs itself can be backed up anytime with a file backup. And it doesn't require any Domino backup integration. So Domino doesn't need to be involved in that. So that's why it is especially interesting also from backup point of view. But not only that, it reduces your storage dramatically. So I put all the benefits for you to read later. So it is also for backup, but not only, right? Mail database size will also not grow exponentially anymore, the NSF size, when you have the deduplication and put DAOs out of your mail database. And I put slides how to enable it with all the details. Oh, there's one more. There's always one more. So in Domino 901 feature pack 8, there is something new called NIF NSF. NIF NSF will allow you to move the indexes for folders and views out of the database. Why is that important? Because during backup, you only want the NSF without the index. You don't care about the index. So it is important to separate the index. And when you look into snapshot backup, you even want to put it to store it on a different disk because you are going to snapshot the whole disk. So NIF NSF has two modes. One, the easier mode is to put the index out of the database, the NDX file, but you can also move the NIF NSF to a complete different disk, and then you would only snapshot the NSF part with the data in it. Last but not least, and this is important for snapshot backup, when you have full text index enabled on a database, the full text index by default is next to the database, and that's the same data volume. So you want, for storage optimization, maybe you want to like keep the file system smaller, then full text index on a separate disk would be a good idea anyhow. But if you use snapshot backup, you want to exclude the full text index. And the easiest way to do that is move it to a different volume. And then I mentioned that earlier at the beginning, DBMT is a good replacement for compact and fix up. So usually you don't need to fix up databases every day or every week, but you should have a compact every week. And DBMT has a very nice option. It has a pre-allocation. By default, it allocates the size that it calculates to be the new size of the database after compact, and will allocate that size in one chunk. And this allows you to defragment your disk on compact. And in addition, you can make this pre-format percent a little bit more or a little bit less. So for in my example, I have 110%. So it will make it a little bit bigger so that for the next week, you can have a continuous space, because all the additional documents will be added at the end of the file, and then it's not deduplicating, right? It's not fragmenting the disk. Okay, I put an example how it could look like, and this is really the summary of that. So you really have to use DEOS also from backup point of view. You do the compression, NIF NSF, and use DBMT. One last point here is, if you have large databases, there is another feature that could be really interesting to look into. Mail databases double every 12 to 18 months. So if you split between the active mail database, let's say you put a year or 18 months into your main mail database, and then you have an archive database on a different server where you do a backup every month, do a archive every month, then you only need to backup every month, because only the data will change every month. So you can reduce backup efforts again using archive. Archiving, the server-based archiving. I'm not talking about client-based archiving. It's server-based archiving using a policy. So this will run automatically, and it will be integrated in the Mailfile UI. So you will see the end user sees the main mail database and a link directly to the archive. So it's fully integrated into Notes, and this is really something that you could take benefit of, because we always care about the active data, and we want the fast changing data to be backed up every day, and archive mail files could be on a different schedule. So I find it important to provide this information, because it's not just all about backup. We want to look into it with a consolidated view, and it's always important to have all the different components checked first. Okay, the Domino 12 backup functionality. This is the main part of our presentation. That's why we're here. So probably all of you know that you can only backup NSF files consistently online when you use any kind of backup software. So if you shut down your server, you can back it up with any tool that you like, but we don't want to shut down our Domino servers just to back them up, right? So to create a backup that is really reliable and not run into issues with open databases that needs a fix up when you restore them, you really have to use a backup API aware application. So even using volume shadow copy on Windows where you take a snapshot of all the databases, will only give you a crash consistent backup. That means we always need a solution in place to do the backup. In addition, if you want point-in-time recovery, you will need transaction log to be backed up, or at least have an application that can work with your circular transaction logs. And those kind of requirements are there since transaction log has been introduced in Domino 5. And we have new backup vendors on the market that have no Domino integration. So vendors like Veeam, which I will show later on in this presentation. And we also have new environments like so we got someone who is not on mute. Can we mute? Thank you. So Docker containers also need a backup, right? So we have new requirements in the cloud and also in containers and on Kubernetes, and so we really want a backup solution that is directly integrated with Domino, and this is the main background for it. And also, what we are trying to do here is to close the gap between backup solutions and Domino to do any kind of integration. So you can run your favorite backup application, and we are having an integration for many of those applications and offer a solution, a framework for do integration. So business partners and customers can go and build their own integrations. But on top of that, we really want a nice looking UI on the Domino sides that the admin is empowered to restore databases without need to talk to like a backup admin, or the help desk could go and restore databases. And we have functionality in place that makes it very simple to restore a database. You will see that in the demo. The technical background is really, we need, when we back up the NSF storage, we need to use the backup API, and during that backup, Delta files will occur. Delta files are changes in the database during the backup, and the backup API will provide those Delta information. And you see in one or another backup integration that we need to back up the Delta files separately. So if you have a backup scenario where the Delta files are, for a snapshot, for example, are not directly applicable to the NSF after the backup, they have to be applied after a restore. So when you restore a database, you get the NSF back from the storage. And then if there is a Delta file, the Delta file also need to be copied back. And then the Domino backup application, in this case, the restore component, has to combine the Delta information into the NSF. This is really an essential part. And this is really where you need a backup application with a restore component that takes care of this automatically. And it's important to know that this happens behind the scenes, but in many cases, you don't need to deal with it at all on your own. So the components are very simple of the backup. We have a new server task backup and a new server task restore. And we have a Domino backup NSF. So it comes within a template. And the first time you run it, it will create your Domino backup NSF. It contains the configuration. It contains the inventory of the backup. You will see that later on in the demo. And it has a very nice restore interface and restore jobs to restore databases in a very convenient way. One database, multiple databases, your whole server, everything. So I think we can skip that. This is more for reference. I will show this in the live demo with all the details. And I also want to skip like the details for the full backup. Everyone should know how a full backup works and the typical setup of that. What we added in Domino 12.0 already is that you can have a simple backup to local storage or to remote storage, and this is a setup that you can run in 5 minutes. So the first time you start the server task, you want to load backup, and the first load backup creates a Domino backup NSF, and then you review the configuration, and there's 2 configuration documents already prepared for you. You only need to look into the target for databases and translog. In the default configuration, it has C backup NSF and C backup translog. Of course, this is not what you run in production, but if you have a very small test server, this path should be there. It will be automatically created, right? You have always a C drive. That's why it says C backup. It will create the subdirectories, and if you have sufficient space, you could run this. You could run a test immediately without doing much change. So I'm using that configuration also in the Docker repository to do a quick test of the server. So what I do is I launch load backup once, then it creates the database, and I launch it again and say load backup and then log NSF, and it just backs up log NSF, and I check if the log database has been backed up. This is a very simple automation test that I added. And why can I do that? Because the default configurations are already shipping with the template, and I know that it's creating this kind of configuration, and the second time you load it, it will automatically back up already. So, but again, you have to review this path, and you probably want to point it to a file mount, right? A backup mount, and there are also script options to do a mount and an unmount if you don't want to keep it mounted all the time. Restore operations, we will go through this in detail. I will show this live, so this is more for as a reference. The file types involved, I think I don't need to explain too much. NSF, NTF, and .box files. Transaction logs come into play when you enable archive log transaction log, and then the server task will automatically detect that we are in archive transaction log mode and will back up the transaction logs as well. The delta files, I mentioned that already. Those are the delta information that occur during a backup. And last but not least, on a restore, when the database is copied back to your server from the backup, the extension added to the file is .dad. So an example would be names.nsf.dad. This is an intended change because you don't want the server to see the database, and everything that is an NSF, NTF, or the box file, or the NS7, NS9 databases, they will be automatically seen by the server once you copied them back. So this is the kind of trick that every backup vendor uses. Many use like DAD as an extension. Not everyone is using that, but most of them put an extension to it during the activation phase. So the database is copied, and then before it's activated, it will be updated with like the delta information, and then it will be maybe the replica ID will change, and then it will be renamed to the NSF name again, right? That's why we have the DAD files. Okay, backup backends. As I mentioned, we can work with simple backup storage. But of course, when you do that, it will duplicate your NSF data for every backup. That's why it's important that you choose a backend that is compressed and deduplicated. So there are many solutions out there. For example, you can point it to a ZFS storage, which has embedded compression deduplication. It could be also appliance. It could be a storage appliance doing compression and deduplication. So that's a very simple and easy to use integration. There is also S3 as a backend. So you find an integration in the GitHub repository that I will show a little bit later. But S3 is not always the best solution. It's slow most of the times. It works for small servers, but don't expect it to do miracles, right? So it's if you have to back up to S3, then this will take some time. That's one part. The second part is you might have existing backup applications which are not Domino aware on their own, and there are integration options to integrate with the backup vendors. And the good news here, and you will see this in the second part of the presentation, it's a direct integration with VSS writers. And the VSS writers integration gives you a very easy to integrate option with existing backup applications. One thing that you should note, if you copy it to a backend storage and the backend storage is always mounted to your server, this is not an immutable backup. Immutable backup would be something that is separate from your Domino server. So a very simple way would be that you mount and unmount a disk. That's one thing that you could do, but usually you would use a tiered backup. So you would go in and say, okay, the first level of the backup maybe is a copy to a different storage. And then on that other storage, for example, if you have a ZFS storage appliance or anything like that, you could do a snapshot over there. And that snapshot is independent from your normal backup. And just in case like your backup get compromised in some way, like a ransomware attack or something, the ransomware attack could only modify your server data and maybe the last backup that is still mounted to the server, and your ZFS storage is still there with a snapshot of all the backups, and it can be played back. And this is something that you really need to keep in mind because you're doing backup for multiple reasons. It's not just data corruption or a user deletes data. It's also to be prepared for ransomware attack and other issues that can occur. Okay, backup integrations. We have multiple integration points. One would be the simple file integration. The second one would be a command line integration where you launch like a backup tool or a sync tool or whatever to do the actual backup. And the last interface would be an agent interface. And it can be also a mix and match. You could have command line interface for example, for transaction logs, and you could have an agent interface with REST requests. This is the main use case for other backups. So currently we don't have an agent interface used for any of the backup vendors, but when it was developed, we had three different scenarios: file backup commands, command line interface, and agent interface. This is in line to what you also see with Cert Manager and the DNS provider integration. So it's very similar. It's a very similar approach. You find backup solutions integrations in the GitHub project, and the GitHub project also provides you with additional information like storage optimization, general concepts, and the backgrounds about the Delta files. So this is all in addition to the normal documentation. The normal documentation gives you all the details about how you run backup and restore and how that all works. The GitHub repository provided from HCL is everything about integrations, existing integrations, how you can build integrations. So it's really complementary information here, right? It's more for someone who wants to build an integration or uses an integration. You will find the Veeam integration in here, for example, with the documentation, with step-by-step instructions, how to get it running. And if you have questions about it or you have issues, you can always raise an issue here. And this is also the preferred or recommended way when you have questions about those integrations. So you shouldn't open a support ticket, because support can only help you using integrations, but not when it comes to the integration itself, or when you want to build your own integration. Here's a quick example from that repository. So here is a S3 interface for integrating with S3 without any additional scripts. So it's using the command formula way for integration. So in this case, it is the S3 integration with MinIO. MinIO is a server and also a client. So here we're using the MinIO command line. It's called MC, but it could be a very similar integration with the AWS command line S3 integration, where we are also having an example in the Git repository. So here you actually see it's invoking MC with certain command line parameters. And those parameters here are all documented as a reference in the Git repository. And also there's a helper function to build this kind of add formula integrations. So when you want to build something on your own, you best look into the examples to see how it works, and then derive your integration from that. So it always has a backup and a restore configuration, and it works very similar here with the S3 integration from AWS. In this case, the backup target is pointing to AWS here. Okay, that was the first part. Do we have any questions already? No, I don't see anything in the chat.
No, we don't.
So this was like a lot of background about backup itself. Now the next part is really what is new in 12.02. So I had to start with giving you some background, because some of you might not have used the Domino backups already. So, but this is now the new and cool part that we have in 12.02. Before we look into the volume shadow copy, let me give you a very brief idea what a snapshot is, because a snapshot can mean many different things on a platform. It could be a storage snapshot, it could be a VM snapshot, it could be a file system snapshot with ZFS, it could be volume shadow copy, right? But the basic principle behind it is always the same. You always take a full snapshot of your data at that point in time. Everything behind that is really not your job, it's the job of the snapshot, right? So every snapshot window works a little bit different, but they all do one or another kind of a snapshot. On the backup side, we take the full backup, and then on the restore side, what is used in most of the cases is you mount the snapshot, which is your Domino server data directory to a given point in time, and then the databases will be copied back to your data directory. So that's the basic principle that is true for all the different integrations. We are always taking the snapshot, which is a full backup, and then we are on the restore, we are mounting the snapshot and getting data back. So when we look into Windows, most of you know there is something called volume shadow service, and we have the volume shadow copy. When you look into the different approaches that you could have with that, we have two different kinds of how it would be triggered. On one scenario, one flow would be Domino triggers a snapshot. Then that the flow would be Domino brings all databases into backup mode. Then any kind of application will create a snapshot. For example, there's a disk shadow utility shipped with Domino, and it can create a snapshot. Then once the snapshot is in place, Domino would stop the backup mode for all the databases and collect delta information. And then Domino would invoke an external application to back up the snapshot. That would be one way to go. It's not really fully integrated, but it would be a valid approach. If this is what you want to do, then yeah, that already worked in 12.01. Then we have the other approach, the backup application like Veeam would trigger a snapshot, and then Domino needs to capture a kind of freeze event to bring all databases into backup mode. Then the application creates a snapshot, and once that is done, the application tells Domino that the snapshot is taken, and then it would get all databases back from backup mode and collect the delta information. And then the backup application takes the backup of the snapshot, and the delta application needs to be covered as well afterwards. This is already good, and this already works in 12.01 and also in 12.0. So 12.01 had some optimization, and in 12.0 it was already introduced and was already possible. But this is not really how we would see a full integrated solution. So there was an aha idea. It was like from 2018 already, and it had a lot of votes. And HCL really wanted to implement it, but it wasn't that easy. So, but in 12.02 we got full integration as a VSS writer. So a VSS writer is a type of integration where the application itself uses a Microsoft VSS API to register on the operating system to say, okay, Domino registers and says, I'm interested in taking part of the VSS framework. Then a backup application would start a VSS snapshot. It will send an event to freeze to all the applications that are interested. Then Windows takes the VSS snapshot, and afterwards it sends an event to unfreeze, and then Domino would need to process all the delta information. This should be usually done in less than 60 seconds. That would be the general flow, and this was the idea that that HCL had to implement that in Domino 12.02. So Domino would need to register, and this integration would be a backup-only integration. So for restoring a snapshot, every vendor uses their own interface. So almost nobody uses the VSS restore capability, because they're all storing their data in their own format in their repositories. So that's why a restore integration is still needed. But on the backup side, the VSS would be used. And I will show that in very detail in the example. You will understand it better when I show you in an example how it works. So this was the ultimate goal, to have a VSS writer. And you can look into VSS admin list writers, and you will really see a Domino to be listed, Domino backup writer. On top of that, there is something even cooler than just taking a snapshot. So I explained to you that we have the Delta files, and no matter how short your snapshot takes to do the backup, there can be always Delta files, and the databases are in backup mode. And on a restore, you have to bring databases back from backup mode. But a snapshot is a point in time and a read-only snapshot of your NSF files, and you can't modify it anymore, right? No, this is not the complete truth, because there's something really cool on Windows, and this is something that you have in no other operating system. I'm really a bit. I really would like to see something like this on Linux, right? So this is really cool and brings Windows in a very good position. So what you can do is you can do a kind of auto recover snapshot. That means first the snapshot is taken, and then after the snapshot has been done, the VSS backup allows the backup application to add Delta information, the last transactions, for example, to be added to the snapshot. This is, for example, used with SQL Server from Microsoft, where they put the last transactions back into the snapshot. And it would be really cool if Domino would support this as well, right? So we could get rid of the Delta files, and we would have all the databases in a consistent snapshot in the backend. So guess what? This is also implemented with Domino 12.02. So let me walk you quickly through the flow. I will not go into all the details, but I think this graphics helps you to understand how it is. So here's the admin. The admin operates a backup application. The backup application talks to the VSS backend. The VSS backend will talk to a Domino component, Domino backup VSS, which is a new server task. Then we have the Domino backup server task. This represents the data directory, and then finally we have a snapshot. So you see that the backup application is involved in the first step and the final step only. So the backup application doesn't know about all the magic that happens here in the backend. So each of the components now knows what to do based on simple principles and a standard. So let's have a quick look. So the backup is started. The backup will talk to the VSS backend. Can you take a snapshot? So the VSS backup says on identify, it asks the backup, all the writers, if they want to participate. And if it signalizes that it wants to participate, it will be called in an on-freeze event. The on-freeze event will then invoke the Domino backup server task that will use the backup API to start a backup on all the databases here. And then it will report back that everything is frozen. Then the backup, the VSS backend does a snapshot. The snapshot is created. And afterwards, when that is done, it gives the application, here in case Domino, an on post snapshot event and says, oh, by the way, here's the snapshot. If you have Delta information, you can mount the snapshot. So Domino backup VSS mounts the snapshot. It will stop the backup of the databases, apply the changes into the snapshot, and then the NSF backup is finished and the on post snapshot event is finished. And then the snapshot is created and the backup application can continue. And finally, at the very end, the VSS backend will delete the snapshot for the backup application. Sounds really complicated, right? But you will see you don't have to deal with any of this. It will be all happening in the background for you. So it is a new server task. It needs to run permanently. The server task, of course, is a Windows-only server task because it implements the VSS backup API. And it integrates the VSS writer functionality into core Domino. There are some limitations. The data needs to be on one disk, right? All the NSF data needs to be on one disk, and there is a check in the background. And if that is not the case, you will actually get error messages for every database that is not part of the snapshot, right? So it's implemented in a way that it really knows Domino. So it's if you look into solutions from third-party backup vendors, they don't always fully understand Domino. But this application, because it's done by HCL, it understands about external directory links, NSF links, and everything. So if the links would point to the same storage, then you're safe, and it would just work. But if it's on a different disk, you will get error messages, and that is important because if it is not in the snapshot, then a restore will not work, right? So HCL put energy into getting it right from day one, and it's actually checking if it's on the same physical volume, or in the virtual world on the same presented physical volume to the machine. Right. So to have the full VSS integration, the backup application in front of it needs to support the auto recovery mode. If they don't support the auto recovery mode, we can't integrate the changes into the backup. But then this is still a good approach because it supports the standard snapshot way that we have in 12.01 already. But it does that now with VSS, right? So some applications don't support auto recovery, but most applications do that. But if they don't, you can still use the VSS integration. So the restore still needs a separate integration. I will show you an example in a minute. So the VSS integration itself is only for the backup part, right? And of course, like partition servers are complicated. When you use VSS writers, you would need to identify the right application. You would have multiple VSS writers, and HCL decided partition servers are not really used that much because today we have virtualization technology and most environments don't use partition servers. So in a partition server environment, only one partition would be supported to use volume shadow copy. Let me give you an example. Veeam as an integration example. It looks complicated, but it's not that complicated. So here's the restore case because the backup case is now fully integrated and doesn't need an agent. So when you look into the restore scenario with Veeam backup, so Veeam usually operates on your vSphere server, and it's talking directly to a VM, and it's backing up to the Veeam storage. So what it does, it's creating, when you do a restore, you operate the Domino backup NSF, create a restore job. The restore job uses a restore script which communicates over SSH to OpenSSH server component installed on the Veeam backup server. And then it uses the PowerShell integration of Veeam because that is the best integration, the most flexible integration they have. It identifies the snapshot. It talks to the backup backend, and the backup backend will go and mount the disk, and then Domino copies the data, the restore script copies the data, and then after that is done, it will unmount the snapshot, and the operation is done from the Veeam side, and then Domino will take the file, the DAD file, will recover it, will change the replica, and so on. Right? This is the integration, and we'll show that in a minute. The 1201 integration was more complex. So when you look into 1202 and the Veeam integration, make sure that you're using the new integration documentation. So this is the new integration, and it's leveraging the VSS writer interface. So I made it very clear in the documentation that this is the requirement, that you need 1202, and you need to use the VSS writer interface. But this documentation is much simpler than the integration that we had in 1201, because it's only required for the restore operation. Okay, I would show you something, and this is not just marketing for Veeam, it's something that you actually can use on your own for free in a small environment. So Veeam has a very cool community edition. It has most of the functionality, almost everything, and you can run this with up to 10 workloads. So you can back up to 10 servers, or if you're a one-person shop, you could run your notebook backup and your Domino server backup on the same time. So it's fully free and fully available, and you can use the integration with the community application. So I will demo it also with the community edition. So I hope my session didn't expire. Here we go. So let me show you quickly what we have here. Here is a configuration, a very simple configuration for on the Veeam side. You give it a name, you add a computer. In this case, I added my local computer. So I'm not even using the vSphere integration. I'm using the agent, the Windows agent that is also VSS supported. So we have a volume level backup. I'm just backing up the Domino data on drive E, and I give it a backend storage. So I put it to a Veeam backup repository, and then we have almost no guest processing. So you see, we only have the VSS requirement, no scripting, nothing. So no freeze and unfreeze scripts. So only VSS, right? And then we have a schedule. We're not using the schedule here. So what I want to demo first is how you can run without any configuration. You only need to start the VSS plugin, and I show that in another example and afterwards with more details. So I started that already. That's the only point that we need. We need the Domino backup NSF to be there and the server task to be started. And what you will see now is that this guy initiates the snapshot, and then you see something happening on the Domino server side automatically. So I would always say automatically. So Veeam is a little bit slower from the operations because it does a lot of operation in the backend. So I started it here. So now you see it's running. And at some point you see that it's starting to communicate with the Domino server. I enabled debugging. So you see some operations that you won't see usually in production. So it gives you all the events that the VSS does in the background. Actually, it's good to have a slower integration here as the first example, because the second one that I show you will be so fast that you won't see what's happening. So you see the unidentify is called, and then we have prepared snapshot, and then it's bringing all the databases into backup mode, and then the Domino side is already done, right? So you see that here it brings everything into backup mode, and then you have the on-freeze event, and then afterwards you have the on-tar event to bring everything back from the backup mode. This is not used here because Domino and Veeam can use the auto recovery snapshot. So you see here that here we have the on post snapshot called, and then it says, oh, here we get a component, the Domino backup component. This is this volume here, and on this volume we have the snapshot. That's the snapshot, and then Domino mounts the snapshot, and then it is in the post snapshot event, and it's capturing all the changes for those databases and sending, so it's sending an unfreeze event afterwards, and then all the deltas are applied immediately, and the snapshot is finished. And here you see the summary. And finally, and that's the last event in the row, after this is finished already, at some point, the backup application sends another event, and the event is the on backup complete event. And this event is used to update the backup with the latest information. So you want to know that not only the snapshot worked, but also that the backup completed on the Veeam side. So when you now look into the Domino backup NSF, you will see in the log that we got a new snapshot here. I did one earlier today, and this snapshot has all the information. You see that we have an auto recovery snapshot, so not just a snapshot, it's an auto recovery snapshot, and you see that it started here, it ended here, 3 seconds, and then the snapshot completed after another second. So this was very quick on the Veeam side. Usually it takes a while, but because we are having a snapshot and a delta snapshot, this is very quick. So now this shows you the logs for the backup, and let me show you how a restore works. So here is, this is the part of the logs. Here is the part of the restore, the configuration. So we have the Veeam integration for Windows, and you see that we have a snapshot restore script here, 2 scripts, a start command and a snapshot command. Sorry, I'm on the wrong side. So this would be the snapshot integration that you used for 12.01. For 12.2, you don't need that anymore, but you need a restore integration. And here is the restore command, and there is a post restore command to unmount the snapshots afterwards. And in the main tab, you have an output option. So by default, it says errors only, and I on purpose put this to log all output because I want to show you what's happening in the backend. So let's do a restore, and I will show you directly a multi-database restore because that's the more interesting option. So you can actually go into the inventory now here, and you see all your databases. And let's open the help directory, for example. So we can select all those databases, and instead of doing a restore, we do a multi-restore. The multi-restore puts all your databases into here. It has separate documents, and it has one main document. It's not a response document. It's putting all the information together. It looks like a response document thing, but it's not. It's using a different mechanism here. So you once go into the multi-restore, you select the time from where you want to do the restore, and when you press this button, it finds the selected backup for you, and then you submit the restore, and now it's sitting there waiting, right? And it's submitted, and you would need to load the restore on the server console. But here you have a very easy to use restore command, which will talk to your Domino server and does a restore operation. It does a load restore. And you will see now I had the quick edit on the server. So you see it's now starting. Here it's running, and you will see now here that at some point it will talk to the Veeam side. In my case, it's all on one server, but in production you will have it on multiple servers. So it's using the SSH protocol, and it is doing a disk publish. And the disk publish will publish the storage from the snapshot directly to the server. And now you see it's recovering the databases one after another. And when you look in here, it already did all the databases, and now it's waiting for the unmount operation to finish. It takes a moment to unmount, so Veeam takes some time in the backend. And once that is done, you have all those databases restored. So even it takes longer to unmount than to do the restore. So it goes to the Veeam side and finds the right backup, mounts it, and then afterwards now it's done here. You see that the job is gone, the disk publishing job is done, and here the restore is completed. Now you have all those databases restored. If you want to get rid of those databases after the user got like changes from the database back and so on, you can go in and say, okay, retention date. So you go in here and say delete restore databases. You run the restore server command, and it will delete the databases again. So it has a full workflow of restoring and removing old restores, right? So I'm only showing you the new functionality. So there's much more to discover. It would be probably another 60 minutes. We don't have any, no, we have one question or one info. Can we restore database to a different folder? Right. Yes, this is the default here. So when you go in, and maybe I show that in another example in the other demo, because that's quicker. You can, by default, it's restoring, when you go in here and take this database, you do a restore. By default, it puts it to the restore folder, and you can change it to a different folder. You can keep the subfolders if you want to. You can recover point in time. You can change the replica ID, disable agents, change the database title, restore documents and folders if it's a mail file. So there are many different options here, but I want to show you the new functionality, right? This session is about the new functionality. Any additional questions, or I will show you another demo with a different integration, and I show you how the integrations really work. So if there are no questions, I will just continue and show you another machine. I need to get this over here. So let me show you my server. So first of all, we need to start backup VSS. So I'm starting it again in debug mode, right? So this server has no integration yet. So I will show you how that works. So you go and launch the VSS plugin. So the backup Domino backup NSF is already created. Now you can go in and do VSS list writers. Here you see the Domino backup writer. So the next thing I want to show you a different integration. Restic is a very interesting project, and it's actually a Linux tool which also now has Windows support, which makes it very interesting, and it has snapshot support as well. So I have the references in the presentation, but let me show you quickly what I did, and I think you will love it. I will publish this soon in the HTML repository. So it needs the Restic executable. It's written in Go and it's compiled, and it's just 22 megabytes, right? It's only that, nothing else. And it works a bit similar like Borg backup. So if someone looked into Borg backup, it is using a very similar concept. You can either put it to a local disk or to a SSH or actually SFTP backend. You can also put it on S3, and it's using its own backend. It does deduplication and compression, and it's fully encrypted. It's a very interesting application, and it's so easy to use. So the backup mode is, let me show that to you in a minute. So here, oops, we first initialize a repository. In my case, I say Restic init, and the repository is ebackups Restic. It will ask you for a password. I will use a simple password in my case, and then the repository is created. That's all you need. That generates the repository. So now let's go and take this and run a backup. So let me paste this in. We're using the repository. I put it in verbose mode. I say backup -e and notes data. That's where my notes data is. I give it the password in a file. I prepared that already. And then the last important piece here is use file system snapshot. And this will invoke a VSS snapshot with auto recovery. And the last pieces that I added this morning here is exclude the Domino HTML directory, exclude the IBM technical support directory, and because I didn't move out the full text indexes, I'm also excluding the full text indexes. And let's have the magic begin. And it's so freaking fast. You will see all the operations going on. Here it's creating the snapshot. Here Domino is doing all the operations, and now it's done on the Domino side, and you see it just backed up everything in a couple of seconds, right? And this was a full backup of my test server. Do you want to see that again? Let's do a second one. Now it takes even shorter because it only takes the delta. Done, right? So now in the second case, it only had 9 megabytes stored. So it's doing really cool deduplication, and now we have multiple snapshots. So you can look into the snapshots. Here we have 2 snapshots. So how would I now restore the snapshot? I prepared something for you. I wrote a small batch file that does all the magic. It's just like 130 files, lines, including the header, like it's 100 lines of code. So it will go and queries their interface and copies the databases back, all right? I will not go through the details. You will see this in a couple of days on the GitHub repository. So, but let's see this in action. So I need to show that with my production mail client because this is my production environment. So here is the backup. And you see we have 2 backups. And here's the first snapshot, here's the second snapshot, and it's just, it looks like the one that you saw from Veeam, right? And what I didn't show in the other one was the log output. And here's this is the information. No, actually, I would maybe at the very end I show something about the end-to-end logging on the Veeam side. So it just did the snapshot, and we can just recover the databases. Let's do this again with the inventory. We can pick a couple of databases. Help databases are always good for a demo. Maybe I take the inodes form and the Panagenda database and do a multi-restore. I go in here, I say to select, I select the backup, and I do a point-in-time recovery because we have transaction log enabled. It's circular transaction log, but as long as the transaction log is there, it will just work. So you submit the restore, and in my configuration, I'm logging all output. So you will see here, when I run the restore command, you will see step by step what's happening. It's pending activation. And then finally, all the databases are done. So this was the normal view. Here's the multi-restore view. If you want to see what happens behind the scenes, you can look into the log. I enabled logging even if everything worked. So you see all the output from the restore script. So this is actually the restore script in action. So the first operation will find the right snapshot, and all the following operations will use the mounted snapshot. This is very similar to what we have on the Veeam side. Do we have any questions for this integration? We got one question about if it's possible to have multiple backup configurations for a single server with different paths and retention period. No, this is not possible because it's at some point like it's a really complex integration. It allows you to do complex integrations. It can allow you to use simple integrations, and the challenge here is the more complex you make those operations, the more difficult is it to support it. So we have already a lot of integration points, and we put the energy into making it as configurable as possible. But having multiple restore configurations and backup configurations would make this integration even more complex. So there is currently no way to have multiple integrations. In theory, you could run multiple backup databases and put this into different ones. So you can have a configuration database where you have a different integration. So you can't put this into the same database because it would be really difficult to find the right restore for that integration, right? So, but what you can do, actually, it's not documented, but you can specify for each backup and restore application, you can specify a different Domino backup NSF database with a different name. And this would allow you to run multiple configurations. But I would not recommend that. I would rather look into your scenario and see if you want to save some backups for a longer time. So if you want to do some long-term archiving with this VSS writer integration, all the backups are consistent, right? So you don't need the Domino restore to do a restore. So you could let the backups expire on the Domino side and just keep it in the backend in your integration for a longer period of time. So this would be the option that I would take. I would keep the same type of backup, but then in the backend keep the backups for a longer time, and then you could use the command line to get them back, or you could use a different restore integration. So there is something called a third-party restore integration, and you could use that to get the backups back still from this other or this long-term backup storage, or you could use an import. So there is an import where those log files will be. This is the one for the restore. For the backup, all the logs can be stored either in the backup document or also on disk, and this contains all the information about your backup, and you can import that back into your backup NSF. This is on purpose not documented as a feature because we don't want to mess people around and try all those kind of integrations, because it needs to be supported. But if someone needs a special integration, the GitHub repository will be where you can ask questions, and I can help you to set something up. But you really have to distinguish between what is out there as coming with Domino as a standard offering and what can the open source project do for you to make it even more configurable. Does that help you? Yeah, thank you. That was a private message back. Thank you. Do we have any other questions or any feedback or any integration that you want to see in future? So HCL cannot provide all the integrations. So you see some integrations that are written by me, and that's actually community work. So we are having this community project also for you guys to build your own integrations, especially when it comes to third-party restore integrations, where you have a full Domino aware application, where only the restore is too complicated. So there's actually since 12.01 a way to use the restore interface also with any kind of backup application. So we are going to look into integrations where like the IBM Spectrum Protector, formerly called Domino TSM TDP, will be integrated. Also, we are planning to have a Commvault restore integration. So you would use the TDP components to do the backup, but for the restore, we use this nice interface and allow you to use that interface to work with your existing backup application. So it's always better to use a backup vendor-driven application that is fully integrated, and that's why HCL added the third-party restore to help other vendors that are playing nice with Domino to use that backup restore interface, right? So what I showed you quickly here, just to remind you, so we have the backup error logging and it's end-to-end logging. Maybe to show you one last thing and jump back to the Veeam backup, I show you one last thing. The end-to-end logging is really end-to-end, including operations on the Veeam side. So when you look, look into the logs. I didn't show that initially. Here you see we have the log of the operations, like the inventory, and here is the log of the of the backup. So for the backup, you won't see much, but for the restore, you will see all the details. Let me see. Oh, I deleted the, no, they're there. Okay. Here's the multi-restore, and you see all the operations going on. So here is the invocation always. This is the script that is invoked with all the parameters. And here you see output directly from the PowerShell script running on the Veeam side. So it is really end-to-end logging, getting you all the output of all the commands that are invoked. So this is actually coming from the Veeam server. And the next operations are coming from the restore script. And then here you see the next operation. The next operation will use the mounted snapshot already. It says, oh, the snapshot is already mounted. The first operation mounted the snapshot. And then finally, at the very end, we have the post restore operations, and the post restore operations do an unmount of the backups, and you see actually it took almost 38 seconds. That was the longest part of the restore. So all the restore operations were quick, and the unmount took a while. So this is really end-to-end logging, and it's really helpful to see that for all the integrations, because then you don't need to look into any log files. It's all on your fingertips. It's all integrated in here. And that's the feature that was added in 12.01. It's called end-to-end logging. And it has been added while I was working on the Veeam integration, because I thought it would be really useful to have all the logs in one place. And all the logs in one place means directly in the restore or the backup job. So I think that gives you a good overview now what we have. If we have no more questions, I think we should be good.
Yeah, I do not see any more questions.
So it was a lot of content alone what we have in 12.02, and the Veeam integration is one of the references, but it will not stay the only reference. So I will put the RESTIC soon. And personally, I will use the RESTIC on my machine locally. So this is also really good for a developer machine. And I will also have a look into maybe, now that we have the 64-bit client, call me crazy, but I have most of my data on my client, right? So I also want to back up my client. So I will look into getting this working on my Notes client. So it should also work on the Notes client. Only stopping the VSS integration could be a bit tricky, but that's something that I maybe find a solution for. So you could actually run what I've just done also on your Notes client maybe in the future. Even it's not included in the client now that it's 64-bit. We have the backup, the restore task, and also the backup VSS. I never tried it. It's just an idea. But what you can use today would be the RESTIC integration for a local test server, right? For a lab server. And the Domino backup and restore saved my life a couple of times while developing. So I made some changes, and then I noticed that something was going wrong. So the designer once broke my whole database, and I just took the last full backup and I did the point-in-time recovery into a different location. Then I looked into the design, and then I thought, okay, let's replace the design of the database. So it's not just for disaster recovery or for users having done something to delete folders or documents. It can be really also very helpful for a developer to always have a point-in-time go-back scenario, right? Just keep that in mind. So it helped me like 2 or 3 times already. saving a couple of hours of work. So maybe that's a good last statement. If you have questions afterwards, just ping me directly or go to the Git repository. I think we're over like 30 minutes, but I think this was helpful to have the demos. So with that, I wish you a successful and remaining good conference. So I hope you find it helpful. So let's close it for today.